Welcome to the Closer podcast. It is here where we invite industry leaders in this partnership space to talk about their entire journey and how they became so successful at this complicated game called the partnerships. Today, I'm extremely excited to have influential leader in this space with us. We have Michael Musselman today with us. Michael is the Vice President of Partnerships as Astronomer. Prior to Astronomer, he came from Lacework, where he was one of their first early employees. He was there before they hit 100 employees. He kickstarted and grew partnerships function there and scaled it to encompass multi-cloud alliances. He is also a member of several cloud partnership advisory services like Caddyshack, and is passionate about sharing his knowledge and building cloud partnerships from the ground up. Michael, super excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for our discussion today.
Excited as well. So let me start off with your time at Lacework. You were the first slash sole owner of the partnerships mandate. What was the opportunity or need you identified that led you to pursue and build cloud partnerships, and specifically with the three hyperscalers?
Yeah, so I was hired at Lacework early. I was employee 68, and I wasn't necessarily brought in to, you know, build a cloud partnership. I was brought in to start thinking about like what should we do from a strategy, what kind of partnership should we have, like a mix of business development, maybe tech alliances, right? A lot of software companies have other interactions with other independent software vendors, so other ISVs. And so that's kind of how it started, being very early, small sales team. But what ended up happening really fast, and it's just being in tune with the sales team and the sales process. I had a couple sellers say, "Hey, can we sell in this marketplace thing?" And I was like, "I don't know. Let me go figure that out." And we would also, the software was built on AWS, and at a previous company, I didn't. We're out while I ran a bunch of partnerships, business development, tech alliances. I didn't. We were also built on AWS, but I didn't realize this whole world of AWS partnerships and that. And so the natural answer is kind of look at where you're built, where you're driving consumption. And so it was, oh, I guess you join the APN. Oh, I guess you list your marketplace listing. Oh, I guess you transact that way. And it quickly snowballed very fast in the first year or two. And then, I also think a lot about like doing this and giving back to the community as I learned more and as I met more people and I learned more. It was a good affirmation of like the great work we were doing, but also like helping back to the community and, sharing my experiences with others.
Absolutely, and that I've been a huge fan of your work, as I mentioned off camera,
Yeah.
and the kind of content that you put out, the kind of talks that you've done have been super useful. As a follow-up to that question, Michael, at what point did you start seeing that this cloud GTM route, selling via the marketplaces, started to become really serious go-to-market pillar within your organization, either at Lacework or previously as well?
Yeah, since we're in the circle of truth, I don't, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this
Mm,
for the last 4 or 5 years. It's different and the market's changed. And I think there's a lot of benefits to doing this, but if I'm staring a CRO or a CEO straight in the face and they're going like, I want to do this, why? I expect this, I expect that. If I put $1 in, how many dollars do I get back? It's not exactly a simple answer. And so my team who knows me and a lot of people who know me, I speak in a lot of analogies and it's easy to make comparisons to stuff. And so the way I've used this, but the way I think about this, like if I went outside into my backyard and planted an apple seed, right? Like I don't get apples tomorrow. I don't get them next month, right? I need to, it needs sun and water, and I probably don't want the weeds to overgrow the plant. And there's a little seedling. And, the truth is, in maybe a year or two, I have a mature apple tree and it gives me
mm,
apples. But
mm.
if you ask me, how many apples are you going to get in that first year's harvest? I can't predict that either. So if you think about the same story and you equate it back to business and even what we do, that cloud go to market, there's a lot of little intricacies around co-build, co-sell, a lot of the C's that are thrown around, but it is really hard to forecast and predict. If I do this stuff here, I'm going to get this as an outcome. And as you can imagine, it's a pretty significant investment for any company to say like, oh, my 68th employee or, will transition. But, within a few hundred employees, it's like, that's a pretty significant investment to go hire someone like me, I'm going to go hire a team because there's a lot of stuff to do. And so I think the answer is it's hard to predict that. But if you take it with the right assumptions, if you look at the cloud and the cloud go to market, maybe different than what a lot of folks are familiar with, their channel partner strategies, SIs or MSPs, those are pretty well known things. There's
Mm.
pretty well established leaders and industries. This is very different. It's very new. We kind of joked around and called it the next generation channel, but it's just, I think you put all of these in different buckets. And as a business owner, revenue leader, you just kind of have to think through all of this stuff. But I do believe now, after seeing this a couple times, it is important. It's an important new channel, route to market, relationship, partnership to any software business, depending on what you do, depending on where your customers are. But it's not always going to be right for every business, and it might be better earlier, later, depending on a couple of the other scenarios that your company's faced with.
And then, Michael, a follow-up to that one is like, let's say there's an alliance leader who's thinking of this strategy right now, right? They are going to their
Yeah.
leadership and saying, "Hey, we should do this." Like, Michael Musselman saying it, like, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, and then the natural question that CROs and CEOs
Yeah.
will ask is, "Hey, like, okay, tell me the ROI. Why
Yeah.
should I invest X in this channel versus X in some other channel that I know will give me returns in a concrete fashion?" How do you
Yeah.
convince them? Because you and I know that it works. Like, we've seen it
Yeah.
multiple
Yeah.
times. You just have to back it, and you have to, like, the analogy that you gave about
Yeah.
apples is just fantastic. But how do you actually
Yeah.
convince someone who has not done it before?
I think it's all around you. It'd be a hard conversation to fight now, just seeing your peers. Early on, I mean, we were talking about Lacework and security.
Mm,
Like, we were a small startup, but security isn't new, right? You've got Palo Alto and CrowdStrike and Microsoft. You had a lot of vendors, right? And even in security itself, right? We just were coming off of a few weeks, or last week I wasn't there for the first time, but RSA. And I always had this idea of I'm a CISO to a company. I'm at Moscone in San Francisco. I come down the escalator and I see a sea of security. It's like thousands of vendors. Like, do I need all that? Do I even have these problems? Like, it's a daunting thing. So the natural is to like these big partners that are already in the space. Well, the good and the bad thing is they're not always the most innovative, maybe the best, but it's a safe selection. And the alternative is like, even when I get to Lacework, like, well, Palo Alto already has a very mature channel. They have a very mature go to market. They're in all the marketplaces. Like, if you're the CEO or CRO, then you're like, I kind of have to do this, because if I'm not, what risk am I putting my revenue or my business to by not doing similar things to my number one or number two competitors? So I think there's a forcing function to that, but purely to the kind of ROI and like, how does this make sense? I do believe that it's different. It's not different. I think a lot of channels and a lot of partnerships, you're going to get out of it what you put into it, right? The more you put into it, the more you invest in it, you're very likely to put something out of it. And we can keep using the apple and the orchard analogy or whatever. But I think with many relationships, if this is important, but early on, like my experiences and the behavior, Laceworks customers were already in the cloud. They already had committed spends with the cloud.
mm,
And so another analogy I commonly use is like the marketplace, you could see this as a fulfillment engine. You could see this like credit cards. Like, I own a little coffee shop down the street and I only operate in cash, and that's fine. But am I losing business because I don't accept Visa or American Express or Venmo or PayPal or Cash App, right? And I see these all as possible like currencies that I want to accept. And I think for a lot of businesses, they realize, oh, well, I have a merchant fee with Visa and I have a merchant fee with Amex, but like, this actually gives the customer, the consumer, what they want because of their own benefits, cash back, points, whatever it is for travel. But like, as a business, I want to be able to say yes anytime a consumer comes to me and says, "Hey, do you take American Express?" The answer is yes. But even that little merchant, what I think a lot of businesses or even CROs forget is that, if I'm always accepting cash and I have this little register and I'm giving you
mm,
change and it's a very simple thing, even adding a credit card is not, it's done, right? Like, I need a bank account. I need a merchant. I need a new payment transaction mechanism to accept these credit cards. I don't get the cash today. I have to wait till tomorrow or the next day to clear and then to get paid. Well, now my finances changes because I can't just use cash accounting anymore like I was. Now do I need accrual? Like there's just a lot of things that complicates a very simple problem like that. So if you apply that to businesses like we have, it's not. And in this case, let's say I want to move to one of those, let's say I'm built on AWS and I want to go accept the Amex at Google Cloud. Well, I can't exactly just turn that on tomorrow, right? You may have to re-platform. You may have, and that's different. It doesn't give your customers exactly a ton of business value, but those clouds care about where you're built, where your consumption is, security, where's the data that the customer is using for you. So there's a lot of considerations. And so I think a lot of businesses, I think a lot of CROs, the reality is yes, when someone wants to buy this through the Google Marketplace or the Azure Marketplace or the AWS Marketplace, we want to say yes, right? That's easy. That's the last thing I want to have to objection handle. But I have to consider some of that. And then for us, and I've seen this, that marketplace is important. I joke a lot of times and say it's kind of the key to Amazon's heart. So for AWS, that's certainly a thing. They like that. They measure it. They keep the ecosystem close. And so if I'm trying to build a partnership with that vendor, with that partner, like part of it is knowing what's important to them and doing the more I can do of that thing that's important to them, it's very likely the better partner I can become.
So, Michael, by definition, cloud partnerships involve product and engineering lift to bake your solution into the cloud infrastructure, into the marketplaces, right? And what was your role in facilitating this and serving as that bridge between these two internal like stakeholders? And what have you seen that has worked in the past where making this conversation easier has actually, accelerated your own or the company's benefit of accelerating the journey to the marketplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of nuances to give a complete answer, but I'll start in a couple areas. So I'll talk about AWS or like co-build, co-innovation. There's different, but it's all a co-thing. And my lesson learned is that, like, if I'm thinking about one of the cloud service providers, there is two kind of fiefdoms of power. There's the sales team and revenue, clearly, but there's also the services team that are builders and building the things that the sellers sell. And so clearly there's an interconnection to wanting like us to work with the sellers at AWS as an example, because we're selling into where their customers are. But the second thing is the service owners are building services that our backend technology uses, number one, but number two, they're also producing services that we may attach to, we may do security for, we may compete with, which is probably the case for most of us. And because of that, there's this frenemy, I don't know, maybe an overused term, but there's a situation where I want to know them and I want to do stuff with them. And I want to, and many times, like I think at Lacework's time is a good example is we wrote a case study with the EKS team because we secured EKS, we used EKS, our customers, a lot of them used EKS, but I didn't do it as like our customers using this service. I actually asked our engineering team, like, can we go write our SREs? Like, let's go write a case study for AWS about how we use EKS and how EKS helped us move from our US instance to our European instance and our Australia instance that we probably couldn't have done if we were still using our own managed Kubernetes service. We couldn't have done it as fast. We couldn't have done it as cheap. So I think, and in doing that, I was actually helping the EKS team, like be their hero, be their champion, use us as an ISV as an example, how it helped expand our own business as a give back. But then in later stages, we would do security for EKS. So we were also close to that team about this. And many times we would ask them for, hey, you could make our platform better, but honestly, you could make GuardDuty better. You can make your services better too. If we could see more behind, let's say, the management EKS thing, like there's telemetry that you guys are managing that we would love to see, or there's some function in, the open Kubernetes that we use, but you guys don't expose it yet. And so I think in many ways by these give and gets and getting close to these services teams, even on our back end, this actually helped build our partnership, because while I have historically reported to the CRO and the revenue side of the business,
Mm.
like all partnerships, they have to be win-win, and they're multifaceted. And so even if I absolutely want to change our revenue, help build pipeline, and speed our pipeline, and make marketplace and a lot of that stuff, the other side of it is like these teams also will make our services better, make our customers happy, and there's a lot of angles to that. That's one side. The other side is, maybe uniquely, I've talked about this, but I had engineers. I don't write code. I play a doctor on TV. I can say all the words. I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm not like you. I'm not an engineer, never done CS. And so a lot of co-build, at the end of the day, it is engineering. And so most partners, whether they realize it or not, and you know this business personally, your first co-build is like listing on the marketplace. Like there's some stuff you do in the UI, but someone's got to redirect them to a landing page. Someone has to capture data. And so the first co-build activity for most partners is actually listing in the marketplace. But there's a lot of other things you can do. And like I look back, and I had an awesome team that supported me, and I have an awesome engineer who'd worked for me. And we did a lot of things that got us closer in the partnership. So for a lot of folks, I'd say one of the highlights is we were one of very few partners. I think as when we did this at last reInvent, we were the first security partner to build an AWS game day. And so it
Mm.
sounds good. It's a gamified environment with a quest and, unicorn company, and it's fun. But what people don't realize is you're writing code in AWS's environment to host this game. Like you're taking your software, you're hosting it in their environments, and you're literally writing all the cloud formation and all of the code so that in this case, we had hundreds of people at reInvent all come and play our quest. Um, but I can't do that on my own. And
Mm.
also, in the world of like AWS partnerships where there's hundreds of thousands of partners, being one or a very few set of partners who can even do this stuff, that automatically kind of puts you at the next pedestal of the partnership. And so the clouds do look at every partner that they have, like they have hundreds of thousands. So why would they spend any time with you versus your competitor versus another partner? And I think a lot of that is if you look at a lot of parallels. I'm a football fan. I like the NFL. So it's like offense, defense, and special teams. And so if you look at even the partnerships with the cloud, you've got co-sell, co-build, co-market, right, as the first three. And so if you think of that in the same light, is like if I only did co-sell and I just knew the sales team, like that's great, and I might get something out of it. But the partners who are great at all three phases of the football game or all three phases of the partnership, they're going to tend to be the top partners. And there's gifts that the sales team has, that the services teams have, that the marketing teams have: money, MDF, credits, feature requests, case studies. And so as a partner, you want all of these gifts. You want to get invited to all of these parties, I call them, even though they're not really parties, but you access. And the partners who do this stuff, who give good feedback, who are regularly trying to meet, work with these teams, that's how you start climbing the partner. That's become a better partner. And I call partnerships, a lot of times I call them friendships. So even though we're business relationships, the truth is, like any of your personal friendships, you probably know a lot of people, but you have very few best friends. And to have a best friend, you probably invest your time in them. You're into the same stuff. You're not just asking them all the time, hey, where's my pipeline? Can you send me more leads? Because they won't want to hang out with you. And so there's different teams and different, vectors that you would want to do. But I just think of those three phases. And then what am I doing in each one? And the truth is, I think co-build and these innovation things you're talking about is the most valuable and impactful thing that you can do, but it's really hard, it's really expensive, and it takes time. And so most people don't start there. But what you can't do is never go there. You have to find resources in your company. And maybe it is your core engineering team. And I can't ask them to not build the product, but over time, there's things that we can do to make these things kind of come together. And I think that's really important for an alliance person, is not always think about the go to market or the give to get with sales and pipeline. There's a whole other couple phases that you really need to consider. And just like everything you do should map to these, I call them 5 C's now. I've talked about this, or 6 C's. There's a lot of other things, but the first three are really the lens at which the cloud provider is holding you accountable, and they're looking at you through those lenses.
And I do want to pull on one thread, Michael, there. Like you mentioned, that sometimes the products that you have, and especially on the engineering side, they may compete directly with something that
Oh
a
yeah.
hyperscaler has, right? Now, in this co-build, co-market, and co-sell motion together, do you think like having a deeper partnership actually increases your chances of getting in closer with the hyperscalers, really showing how differentiated you are and that you're not a threat to them? Or do you think it actually backfires where they have too much visibility into what you're doing?
So many ways to answer that question. I think, look, I think there's different teams. There's always, like, if you compete with a native service at the hyperscaler, there's always going to be a team and there's always going to be people that they have their own KPIs to sell their service.
Hmm.
And if they're successful, they're taking it from your bucket or your competitor's bucket, right? Like there's only so much of the pie that gets to go around. So I think that is the case. But also, AWS, Google, they all have hundreds of services. I think AWS is pretty close to 300 services. Now, are you competing with the revenue producing top 10 services? Or are you competing with service 265? Right? Like, I think there's a different level of priority with each of these services. And if you can imagine today, if it's around ML, AI, data, like you're competing with their crown jewels, and so they're gonna, like you can get there. We've watched other partners, ISVs, I'll say Snowflake as an example,
Yeah.
turn the corner from being highly competitive to actually finding the right better together. But that's very rare, and maybe that applies at AWS, and it may not apply it with another cloud, right? Um, so I think the reality is there's certainly a way to do it. I, the sales teams, this. I think like if everyone's focused on the customer, and this is the beauty with AWS, I'll just pick on them and their 16 leadership principles. Number one is customer obsession. So I think if everyone's focused on the customer's business goals, revenue goals, infrastructure goals, and we can help them better than some service at AWS can help them, they compete, but they're not really competition because they will support and they will do whatever the customer wants to do, even if
Hmm.
it's buying a competitive service from us, because we'll help them get there, maybe get there faster. The other thing is when you have a library of 100 or 200 or 300 services, you can't be the best at everything anymore. Even if you're a $100 million, billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar, AWS now almost $100 billion business, like you still can't be the best at everything. So, your company, our company, we wake up every day and this is all we think about day and night. We don't do 100 other things. We just do this and we're experts at it. And we have a lot of expertise. So I think there's a time and a place for all of this stuff. As far as like with those service teams, I will say the closer you get to those service teams, there's things like roadmap transparency and whatever. And so you kind of, you earn trust like any other friendship. They start telling you more stuff. And the truth is, you might need stuff for them to build that I need or another service team. But the flip side is they might start telling you, hey, here's where we're going.
Hmm.
You might tell them, here's where we're going and where we need some help. Also, they're a big company with a lot of people. So, like, if I want to avoid, maybe I go this way because I know they're going this way, right? So I don't want to head on to every conversation that we're having. I think the other thing is you could draft off that too. So I've seen a lot of companies that are like, oh, the basic security stuff, like, yeah, you can use our stuff. Or if you're already using, I'll just pick on AWS Inspector. Awesome. Use it, deploy it. And then we can pull the data from Inspector and then we can go do +1, +2 results from it. I can put it in Security Hub. We do some analysis. I can put it in Security Lake. We do some analysis. Like there's a lot of opportunities to get end customer value. And actually, you've leveraged the native service, or if they don't have or use the native service, you've put in something next to it. And multi-cloud's another thing. In some of these services, security is a good example where the cloud providers are offering services that kind of do touch multi-cloud, but Microsoft is never going to be great at AWS, right? They'll do good, but they won't be great. And so then there's an opportunity for an ISV, the wider picture. Hey, how do I help this ISV solve something for multi-cloud? Or how do I help this customer solve something for multi-cloud. And I think that's really where ISVs, while we might overlap here in the Venn diagram, there's also these other areas where we're best of breed. In our space in security, it was like we did Windows stuff and Windows host-based intrusion detection. AWS is great at Linux. It's their whole, but they didn't really do Windows. That wasn't their thing. So we would have a customer where it's like, all right, we kind of compete here. Let's meet at Security Hub, but we do Windows and they don't. So here's some good stuff there. And I think you just have to pick your fight and find over time, like any relationship, I think you can start building trust, even with the teams that, they compete with you, but it's not going to preclude them from having a conversation. How can we help you? Where do our connections come together? And at least the security services at AWS, they call them ESS. That's a perfect example where I'd compete with one, we'd integrate with another, and we were co-developing stuff for the future with another one. And so the PMs and a lot of those folks, like when you get high enough, it's like, well, I own the entire library. So like, I get it. We kind of rub here, but we're friends over here. It's, I think there's a plenty of space in a lot of these markets for a lot of people to win and help the customer.
Fantastic. And you know what, Michael, what I've seen is like at the end of the day, people are people and they just like, talking to other
Yeah,
people at a human
yeah,
level. So even if you're
yeah,
competing and head on,
yeah,
at the end of the day, you are able to have, especially in the partnerships world, I've seen in the business development world, I've seen
yeah.
people being open, honest, and if you put your best foot forward, the other person reciprocates in that way as well. So yeah, definitely agree there.
I mean, it was one of the blessings and the risks of doing podcasts like this. I was fortunate enough to speak at reInvent. It's like I'm kind of telling all of my competitors all the secrets about our partnership and what we do. But at the same sense, it's like, yeah, the human nature of this is I enjoy doing that. I get energy from like learning something and then helping other people. But yeah, at the same time, you just have to deal with it. And I think they see the world the same way. Like, look, if we're working backwards from the company's goal and our customers' goals, then we're all doing the right thing and we'll let the customer decide what's better. And there's no room to sleep. Keep innovating, right? Because we're coming after your business, you're coming after ours. Like, you can't slow down because someone else wants that business.
Absolutely. Okay, Michael, I've heard you use this interesting analogy that I absolutely love. The hyperscalers is the sun of your solar system, and the key is to get your business to occupy Earth's position perfectly, where you're not super close to the sun, where you're burning up by being too close, or by being too close to the sun, or you're not super far away where you're literally frozen and out of the partner network, right? So, like in your experience, what's the best way to get to that sweet spot?
Yeah. So again, and I've used analogies and I will continue. It's just the way my brain works. But that one's actually interesting. So that one is quoted. It's not referenced to me, but I think I've used it a couple times before, but during.
Mm,
But anyone who's interested, I noticed that the quote was a little different, but it was picked up in the TEI research paper for AWS for marketplaces.
mm,
So I was fortunate enough. I did talk to others, and we did see the impact of partnering with AWS and the marketplace on our business and revenue. And I've since written, case studies for AWS on our growth and a lot of other stuff. But yeah, it was just kind of a parallel analogy of like, when you compete, like we were just talking about, yeah, if you're competing with a tier one service that generates a lot of AWS's revenue or Microsoft's revenue, it's your Mercury. You're right next to the sun. There's going to be a lot of conflict. You're probably not going to get the help you want. Um, it doesn't mean you can't have a partnership. It just means maybe you don't. And at least at Lacework in my past, I can talk to the fact like we weren't built on Microsoft Azure. We were in cloud security. Microsoft is they have fantastic security tools. They sell a lot. They do multi-cloud. They were very competitive with us. And I never really could find a good,
mm.
is the juice worth the squeeze? Should we invest a lot of time and energy into this partnership when we're competitive in every deal that we find in Azure? And so that's a choice that you kind of like analyze your business and you make. The other side is there's just a lot of businesses. I've worked with a lot of people that have, come to our business or, I've asked them about their business where, it just probably didn't make sense. I won't use the analogy or the exact scenario, but like I talked to someone who was my peer and it's like, hey, what you guys are doing is interesting. I maybe want to do that. And I was like, who are your customers? And he's like, law firms. Well, what do they do? And he's like, well, obviously they practice law. And I said, but you're a software company. He's like, yeah, we make software that these law firms buy. And I was like, do any of these law firms have like committed spends with any of the cloud providers? He's like, no. And I was like, you don't need to do this. Like you can be Neptune, pick your favorite, outside the inner ring. Like you don't need this partnership. It probably doesn't make a ton of sense for your business, your industry. Your customers don't want to buy through the marketplaces. That's not what's important to them. So there's probably a whole other ecosystem of partners for your industry that makes a ton of sense. I wouldn't encourage you to invest a lot of time and attention with this.
Mm.
And that's a decision. But I also find a lot of partners who maybe, put their listing in the marketplace and then just hope like I'm going to get a bunch of business because I've listed in the marketplace. And, I'll quote one of my partners. That's like being a product at Walmart where you're in the back 300th aisle on the bottom shelf. Just because you're in Walmart doesn't mean you're going to do tons of sales, right? Like there's still a lot of work that has to go into that. And I think people thought maybe if I'm in the marketplace, like AWS will bring me business and I'll start making a ton of revenue. And that's not exactly the right assumption either. And so what I see is maybe there's decisions that you make where it's like, I don't need to be in this universe. I don't need to spin around the sun. I don't need any of the goodness, the warmth from it.
Mm.
And that's okay. But then there's others that I think don't really put in the effort. So I've talked a lot about co-sell, co-build. Well, if I just list in the marketplace and I expect something, I'm probably not going to get it. If I just, shove one or two deals or only register the deals that I'm already transacting in the marketplace, then I'm not really showing a pattern of co-selling. I'm not really showing a pattern of, the general KPIs or things that the partner team at the cloud service providers would be looking for me at. I won't show up on a leaderboard probably. I won't have enough engagement or interactions to even try to build. So I think I've seen a lot of partners either just do all co-sell and then never like build together or talk to any of the service teams and I would say not be a complete partner. And so that's another way of like thinking about you being outside of Earth's position, right? And so then Earth's position is, like I said, trying to be a complete partner. But the currency in which I have, which AWS really wants to see, is pipeline and marketplace revenue. And the same goes for any of the other cloud service providers. And the reality is they care about my consumption, which I'll use as my fourth C. They really care about that because obviously I'm a customer. And there's two ways to look at consumption. It's like every time I onboard a customer or I build something, clearly I'm consuming services on the cloud service provider. I'm a customer. My bill goes up. That makes them happy. Their revenues go up. The second time of consumption, we like to call it drag. And that is like, well, when we implement our technology with the customer, what kind of impact does it have to their business, but also what kind of impact does it have to their consumption? So I'll give you an example at Lacework. Like we used a service called CloudTrail. It was the audit, and same with Google, a stack driver, like we use the audit trail because we would take that and we do some machine learning, some really cool stuff on it to help you stay protected or know about anomalous behavior. But that means I needed that service, which means that maybe the customer wasn't running that service or doing anything fancy with it today. So in order to actually get the outcome you wanted, which was to be secure, to maybe find bad things in your environment before you knew about them, well, we would need to turn on that service. And the services are not free. So we would drag that service. Also, when we would deploy our technology, we would deploy in a certain way. And sometimes when we would deploy, maybe we just dump data in S3, right? Maybe when we would deploy, we would use, in this case, we used Fargate. It's an ECS service. And so you had to run our Lambda, ECS, you had to run these things. So our infrastructure was actually having, it was very minuscule, think of data in and out, egress, ingress, and like, a little bit of S3 bucket. But like all of that has an effect to the consumption of the customer. Or if you're software and you're deploying in the cloud, obviously they need, EC2, S3, they have to support that. So actually by the customer buying your technology, you're also helping that, the consumption of the customer a little bit. So if you think of some of these, what you're spending on your own, what you're kind of dragging into the customer, and there's a couple different points of the drag and kind of what you do and how you help them. But I think, you got to get in the shoes of your partner. And in this case, we're talking about these hyperscalers and what's important to them. Well, like every other business, revenue. Well, how do they make revenue? Well, they sell services. Okay, so if I'm a partner that's helping drive revenue, positive outcomes for the customer, drive service adoption, I'm probably going to be a better partner than if I'm not. And so that's kind of like, sometimes you fight, sometimes you shake hands, sometimes you hug, these are big companies, but like that's kind of how you're navigating around the sun, and the warmth you want helps you survive, right? And so I think a lot of that is it's the analogy, but it's like how it works in practice and some of the little tips and tricks that I've learned along the way.
Yeah, and then like if you had to summarize it, like it is a combination of who you are. Like so if you're a law firm, no matter how hard you try, you're never going to be the earth.
Oh,
And but if you're somewhere in the middle, then it's a combination of you having the opportunity, but the other half is you actually doing the hard work to be the earth, right? Yeah, I think that's such a fantastic
absolutely.
analogy.
And then my last is, now the thing is, even for that law firm, there is a sun. It's maybe not our sun, but there's some other
Hmm.
center of gravity. There's something else there. And the last suggestion that I tell people, because there's a lot of us, right, Earth, but like think of how many ISVs are in the partner network for
Mhm.
AWS, hundreds of thousands, 100,000 partners. So you're competing with a lot of other Earths, right? There's a lot of us. So it's not just one planet, there's lots of them, so you're competing in that respect too. But the other thing I give a lot of people for is you're not changing gravity. No
Hmm.
matter how much I want Google or Microsoft or AWS to do something I want them to do, not going to happen. I'm not changing gravity. And
Hmm.
this is where another mistake I see with a lot of businesses is like, yeah, I would love for AWS to do something, bring me pipeline, introduce me to their customer. I want to meet the CEO of Klazar. Like, yeah, but that's not really like, that's dumb. It's a dumb question because now I'm fighting gravity. I'm asking for things that are unnatural, to physics, right? So in this case, you have to, you want that. We all want that. But how do you get that? That's the art, right? It's like, what are the natural mechanisms that I can go, not to reverse the polarity, reverse gravity, but there's things that I can do to get the outcomes I want, that warmth, that heat, but I'm not doing things that are like, you're not going to fight gravity. Over time, you can build a great relationship with these
Hmm.
CSPs, and you might be able to influence, or you can get a bunch of people together that help, like, hey, it would be awesome. We'd go faster if you did A, B, and C, but they're not going to do it on my timetable. And I've seen AWS take a lot of feedback from us and me and actually build all of that stuff. Marketplace is a great example. The ACE portal is a great example. And they love all that feedback from their partners, and the service owners. They love that feedback from their customers, but it doesn't mean they're going to do it. And it doesn't mean they're going to do it when I want it. But,
Hmm.
and that's kind of my gravity analogy in the same story.
Fantastic. Michael, when you started at Lacework, Lacework was hosted on AWS, and it made sense to begin your cloud partnership journey with the ecosystem you're built on. At what point did and should this journey go multi-cloud based on your experience?
It honestly depends. So my first guidance to anyone listening, like, you're going to need the information kind of where you are on this journey. But my first recommendation is, if you're built in a cloud, that's probably the first cloud that you want to start to partner with, start to explore this journey with. Because remember, I said consumption is important. If I'm not built on their cloud, I'm not really driving that consumption. However, there are exceptions to this kind of rule or these laws of physics. Is sometimes, this cloud service provider where I'm not maybe built, we solve a really important customer problem for them, or we solve a really important gap in their product portfolio. And so there's opportunities to start to be a partner, or to solve these end customer problems with your second cloud. But make no mistake, um, the long tail of that is they're going to start to ask, how do you start to drive consumption in my cloud? Or sometimes, marketplaces or other benefits are gated by driving consumption, or it just could be security. Like, hey, we're really important security. And if your data is not in our cloud, then I can't trust, it's like I can't protect you the same way I would if your data is in our cloud. So sometimes the go to market and the business development conversation can preclude that. But I would go back to any founder and say, like, if I was building a SaaS company today, I would be very cautious in how tightly I'm coupling into the cloud native services if I can't detach that and run it in a multi-cloud strategy. So
Mm.
from day one, you've got bigger problems to fry. You've got product market fit. You got a lot of other things you need to do, but I would at least be cognizant of the fact that I may need to run my stack in a second, third, fourth, fifth cloud in the future. And how would I architect my technology today to support that? Maybe 100% doesn't have to run in all the clouds, but part of it has, maybe where the data collectors are, whatever it is that you're building. So I think that's important for any founder, the CTO, or anything like that. Just think about that, because you're probably not thinking about that today, but that's what you want to think about. The second side is just on the go to market. You might find opportunities there, but it's a much longer haul. So I would say, and I commonly will say this, like, I could go do 10 things and probably be very bad at 8 of them, but I could focus on 2 things and be great at it. And so for any company, focus where you are, focus on being great there, and then you'll find that it's the same things that are true to one is kind of true to the other 3, 4, 5. I could include Oracle, I can include Alibaba. There's a lot of clouds out there, right? So sometimes being in a cloud where no one is, that might make sense. Sometimes being in one of the 3 big clouds, you might have benefits to all 3. It really depends on the business, but I think the building blocks are very similar. It's about pipeline, it's about revenue. Many cases is about marketplace revenue. And so, that may open the door, but then there might be vectors where in order to do that, I have to go do this. And so we had seen this at Lacework where, it was ready. We were selling to customers in all clouds, but we were only accepting payment from the AWS marketplace because that's where we were. And so as a business, we decided like, we're not losing deals, but we are losing deals when we can't accept this other form of payment. And so we probably should think about an alternative. And so we started to make steps to, make our service multi-cloud. And then that exposed another route to market, go to market. And a lot of these negotiations, the clouds want consumption. They want committed spends on their consumption. And all of that is a negotiation. It's a discount, but it's all a negotiation. And sometimes those are where in the negotiations you can, maybe you can get something out of it. Maybe you can get a bunch of credits. Maybe you can get, education credits for your team, right? That might be experts in this cloud and maybe not on the other. But I think when we're focused on the customer, making these changes may help the customer from a security or, data transfer costs, but I don't think there's a lot of value for the customer. So the other thing I would question, or at least like before you make these decisions, does the customer care where your infrastructure lives? And if you're able to do your business and they don't care, I would just be cautious in like building to build or, Field of Dreams. It's an old movies. It's like I built this baseball field and then everyone showed up. Like it doesn't really work that way without a lot of intention, a lot of like focused work. And so just because you're there doesn't mean that you're going to get anything special. It does not mean that all of a sudden Google's going to just like, here's all my customers. Like, thank you for building in my cloud. No, it doesn't work like that. So I think just keeping an open minds, and it's good to explore, but I would always be cautious to that.
And Michael, you probably know this. Like, if you let engineers run wild, they're probably going to build all the technology across all the cloud that just works perfectly. And yeah, I'm sure you've been there before.
That's maybe, I don't know, like good and bad, right? No, sometimes yes, like, yeah, there has to be a harmony between the go-to-market team and the engineering team, right? But
Yeah.
usually if you're listening to your customer and centered around their needs, like, yeah, don't listen to just one. You have more than one, but obviously there's yeah, I think it's a pretty fair point to say balanced.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This was fantastic. We covered like maybe half of what we wanted to cover, so maybe we do a part
Yeah, we
two
could
at
talk.
some point
Yeah.
in the future. But this was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom. I enjoyed it thoroughly. I'm sure the audience would enjoy it as
Yeah.
well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, really appreciate it. No, it was awesome. Maybe we'll post that. As a give back to the community, a couple years ago, I did speak at AWS. I did talk about co-sell best practices since we've talked a lot about co-sell. Um, I think that's it's on YouTube. It's a good session to watch because I did talk about our journey early on. This was, 4.5, almost 5 years ago, kind of
Mhm.
what we did, what were our metrics, why these three C's. And I think for a lot of people, that's really good. Um, and then, to plug you guys as well, like getting on the marketplace isn't like you may not be ready for that. So there's a lot of great companies that can help you. Co-sell registering onesie twosie deals is easy. Like, what are you going to do when you got 2,000, 3,000 registrations a year at scale? And so there's a lot of companies out there that can help you. And so obviously I'm with you, but I would encourage, I would start thinking about that early because on your journey from building the partnership to scaling the partnership, it's a lot of work, and there's a couple ways to solve it: people or technology. And I would encourage the technology.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Michael, again, and have a good rest of
Yeah.
your day.
All right. Thank you.